Every individual should have access to the resources they require from the earth. In ancient times, people gathered what they needed from their surroundings, provided that those items had not already been claimed by someone else. The establishment of ownership and property rights did not eliminate this fundamental entitlement. Thus, it remains essential for individuals to have means of acquiring what they need. This means is trade, enabling individuals to satisfy their needs. Since items are now owned, they cannot be obtained without the owner's approval, and they are typically not free. However, they can be purchased or exchanged for goods of similar value. Therefore, individuals are duty-bound to engage in trade with one another to align with the natural order, and this obligation also applies to entire nations. It is rare for any single location to produce all that humanity requires. One region may have an abundance of grains, another may excel in livestock, while yet another might be rich in timber and minerals. If these regions engage in trade as is natural, no one will lack the necessities and utilities. Furthermore, some areas are more suited to certain products than others, like the suitability of certain lands for vineyards over agriculture. When trade and exchange occur, nations can utilize their resources and labor most efficiently, benefiting all of humanity. Thus, the foundation of mutual obligations for nations to foster commerce is firmly established. Nations should not only promote trade, but also safeguard and encourage it. Maintenance of public infrastructure, ensuring traveler safety, and establishing ports and markets all contribute positively to this end. Where such endeavors incur costs, nations may offset these expenditures through reasonable tariffs and duties. A free environment is conducive to trade, and it is within nations' responsibilities to support commerce without imposing undue restrictions or obstructions. Therefore, private privileges and tolls that burden trade should be rightfully condemned unless they serve significant public interests. Every nation possesses the natural liberty to trade with those willing to engage, and any interference with this right is an infringement. For instance, during their period of dominance in the East Indies, the Portuguese attempted to exclude other European nations from trading with the Indians. This unjust and unrealistic claim was rightfully dismissed, leading other nations to view any aggressive action supporting it as justifiable grounds for war. Today, this principle of freedom in trade is widely recognized. While nations are generally expected to engage in commerce with one another, they also have the right to refrain from trading when it may be detrimental or risky. In cases where interests conflict, a nation's obligations to itself take precedence over those to others, allowing it to make decisions based on its own safety and benefit. Each nation determines what trade practices are suitable for itself, enabling it to accept or decline foreign trade proposals without unjustifiably facing accusations or compulsion. Trading with other nations is an imperfect obligation, meaning that if such trade proves harmful, the obligation ceases to exist. Historical examples, such as the Spanish conquest of the Americas under the pretense of trade refusals, illustrate the exploitation of such situations out of greed. These observations provide a clear understanding of the duties nations have regarding mutual commerce. While it's relatively straightforward to define these duties, and the natural laws guiding them for the benefit of humanity, each nation is primarily responsible for determining its own course of action in trade. Therefore, nations often rely on treaties to secure consistent benefits, as each has the right to regulate its commercial relations based on what is advantageous to them. Nations can enter into treaties that govern commercial relationships, as long as these agreements do not infringe on the absolute rights of others. If a nation engages in trade that serves its interests, it acts within its rights, provided that such actions do not hinder the overall commerce of nations. Hence, nations must respect each other's decisions, and assume that they have valid reasons for their trade practices. Commercial treaties that do not violate the rights of others are entirely acceptable, and their enforcement cannot be justly challenged. However, it is critical that nations carefully evaluate any treaty before entering into it, ensuring that they do not compromise their own rights or responsibilities to others. Nations have the freedom to set the terms of their treaties, whether they are temporary or indefinite, and the most prudent approach is often to avoid lifelong commitments due to potential future changes in circumstances. A nation may limit a treaty to grant only a conditional right, preserving its ability to withdraw from the agreement if desired. Once a nation commits to a treaty, it cannot later engage in actions contrary to that agreement that it might otherwise have undertaken for humanitarian reasons, or the general obligation of trade. For instance, If a nation agrees to supply a specific good exclusively to another, it cannot sell that good to anyone else. The same logic applies to agreements to purchase goods solely from a particular nation. A nation may choose to enter into agreements that limit its trade with others if such agreements serve its safety or significant benefits. This is justified, especially if it does not disrupt the general trade of nations, but rather directs specific trade flows. For example, if a nation reliant on salt secures a reliable supply from another nation in exchange for corn and livestock, it acts within its rights to establish such a beneficial treaty. Nations may of course relinquish certain trade rights in favor of another nation and agree not to engage in trade with specified regions or products. Violating such commitments would be contrary to the established rights of the contracting party, which would then be entitled to enforce the treaty. The inherent right to trade remains intact, as it consists of a nation's ability to conduct commerce with consenting partners while retaining the freedom to enter or exit specific trade agreements as deemed beneficial. Nations engage in trade not only for necessary resources but also to generate wealth. As profit opportunities arise, it is lawful for any nation to pursue them. The diligent may claim advantages as they arise, even monopolizing them if done lawfully. Thus, if one nation controls certain goods, another may negotiate exclusive purchasing rights through treaties, subsequently reselling those goods globally. Provided that prices remain reasonable, such monopolies do not conflict with the broader duties of humanity. However, if a nation abuses its monopoly by charging exorbitant prices for essential goods, it violates natural law and may prompt a collective response from other nations to ensure fair access. The institution of consuls serves as a valuable asset for international trade. These representatives reside in major trading cities and ports to safeguard their nation's rights and resolve disputes among merchants. When a nation engages significantly in trade with another, it is essential to have a representative to oversee these affairs, and the host nation is likely to welcome this consul. While there is no absolute obligation to appoint a consul, a nation seeking one must negotiate this right through a commercial treaty. The consul acts on behalf of their sovereign and remains accountable to them for their actions. Although a consul does not have the same diplomatic status as a public minister, they are entitled to certain protections under international law granted by the host nation upon their acceptance. The role of the consul necessitates that they are not a citizen of the host state to maintain their independence in fulfilling their duties. Ideally, they should be exempt from ordinary legal proceedings, unless they commit a serious breach of international law. Although a consul does not enjoy the same inviolability as public ministers, their sovereign's protection implies that serious violations warrant their repatriation for accountability. In the absence of treaties, customary practices govern the relationship between consuls and host states. If a nation receives a consul without explicit conditions, it is understood to be under customary agreements. Historical incidents, such as the grievances raised by the Dutch and the Venetians regarding the treatment of their consuls, illustrate the recognition of such customary protections under international law. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more educational content on international trade and history. Check out these related videos to continue learning about global commerce and diplomatic relations.
On trade and commerce. Commerce serves as a vital means for individuals and entire nations to acquire goods that are necessary but unavailable within their own borders. This trade is categorized into two types, domestic and international. Domestic trade occurs within the boundaries of a nation, involving transactions among its residents, while international trade encompasses exchanges with foreign nations. The significance of domestic trade cannot be overstated. It provides citizens with access to essential, useful, and enjoyable goods. It stimulates the circulation of money, promotes industriousness, invigorates labor, and supports a large workforce, thereby aiding in the growth of both population and national strength. Similarly, international trade holds immense value, offering two distinct advantages. It allows a nation to obtain goods that cannot be produced locally, either by nature or through human craftsmanship, and when managed effectively, it can enhance national wealth and prosperity. Historical examples, such as Carthage's wealth that challenged Rome's might, or the economic success of modern nations like England and the Netherlands, illustrate this point well. Carthage's riches enabled it to compete with Rome, while Holland's merchants have amassed great fortunes, even establishing control over regions in the East. England has also risen to significant power through commerce, shifting from reliance on military conquests to leveraging trade to influence Europe. Nations must prioritize domestic trade for several reasons. Firstly, it aligns with natural law, which dictates that humans should assist one another and contribute to each other's well-being. This obligation emerged after the establishment of private property, where individuals are encouraged to trade goods they do not need at a fair price. Secondly, the very foundation of society is built on the idea that individuals should be able to obtain what they need for their own fulfillment and happiness, making the promotion of domestic trade a collective responsibility. Lastly, a thriving domestic market benefits the nation as a whole, making it a civic duty for citizens to support and enhance this trade. In a similar vein, nations have a duty to foster international trade, ensuring their citizens can access what they require. Among modern states, England stands out for its commitment to this endeavor. The Parliament closely monitors trade, safeguarding merchants' navigation rights, and offering substantial incentives to boost exports of surplus goods. The benefits of such prudent policies are clearly evident. Now, let us explore the natural laws and rights governing commerce between nations. Humanity has a mutual obligation to assist each other, leading to the conclusion that, after the emergence of private property, individuals are duty-bound to sell goods they do not need at a fair price to those who do. This principle extends to nations, granting them the right to procure necessary items from others at equitable prices. However, the right to sell is not reciprocal. Individuals and nations cannot be compelled to sell goods to unwilling buyers. Hence, states possess the authority to restrict the entry of foreign goods without facing valid complaints from affected nations, as such restrictions are based on the sovereign right to protect national interests. If a nation prohibits imports without just cause, it may be seen as an act of hostility, but determining the legitimacy of such a prohibition can be complex. While nations have the right to buy what they need, this right is inherently imperfect, lacking the ability to enforce compliance. If a nation declines to sell goods at a fair price, the buyer may express discontent, but cannot resort to coercion without infringing on the seller's rights. This imperfect nature of the right to purchase mirrors the situation of a poor person requesting charity. While they may rightly complain if refused, they cannot forcibly take aid. In times of dire necessity, nations may act differently, but this will be addressed further in subsequent discussions. Since a nation cannot claim a natural right to sell its goods to others, and since commerce involves mutual buying and selling, the decision to engage in trade lies entirely with each nation's discretion. Should a nation allow trade, it can do so under terms it deems appropriate, as granting trade rights is within its jurisdiction. Men and sovereign states may enter into binding agreements regarding commerce, transforming a natural obligation into a contractual one. Such agreements establish the parameters of trade rights, though merely granting permission does not create an absolute entitlement to trade regardless of changing circumstances. A nation retains the authority to revoke trade permissions at any time. Nations, while encouraged to engage in commerce for mutual benefit, must also weigh their own interests. If trade threatens national security, a state may justifiably withdraw from it, as exemplified by China's historical trade policies. However, such decisions should only be made for compelling reasons, as disregarding the broader principles of humanity could lead to unjust isolation. In examining the rights of nations in commerce, one must recognize that certain rights are based solely on the capacity to act freely. These rights cannot be forfeited simply due to non-use over time. For example, if a person is free to choose where to mill grain, but chooses one mill for many years, it does not imply they have relinquished the right to use another mill. However, if they comply with restrictions without necessity, it may signal an abandonment of that right. Applying these principles to international trade, nations retain the capacity to choose whether or not to engage in commerce with one another. Thus, even long-standing trading practices do not create obligations. Both nations have the right to prohibit trade with one another, regardless of past agreements or practices. While treaties can establish rights of commerce, a nation retains its prerogative even if those rights are dormant for extended periods. However, if the nation granting trade privileges expects certain conditions to be met, failure to do so may result in the loss of those privileges. Commerce should serve the benefit of the nation as a whole, and monopolies can violate citizens' rights unless justified by national interest. Some commercial ventures demand resources beyond individual capability and may require government-backed companies to sustain them. In these cases, exclusive privileges may be necessary for the nation's benefit. Governments should prioritize trade that enhances national wealth while regulating or restricting trade that may be detrimental. A favorable balance of trade, where exports exceed imports, is crucial for national prosperity. Tools like import duties can effectively redirect trade flows to serve national interests. For instance, high tariffs on French wines in England aim to promote the importation of Portuguese wines, reflecting the nation's trade priorities. Such decisions are within the rights of sovereign states to establish trade conditions, and France has no grounds to object. In conclusion, while nations must collaborate for mutual benefit, they retain the authority to determine the terms of trade based on commerce. Commerce is the vital mechanism that allows individuals and entire nations to acquire goods that they require but cannot produce locally. It can be categorized into domestic and international trade. The former involves transactions within a nation, while the latter encompasses trade with foreign countries. Commerce. Commerce is essential for individuals and entire nations to acquire goods that are necessary but unavailable locally. It can be categorized into domestic and international trade. Domestic trade occurs within a nation's borders, facilitating exchanges among its citizens, while international trade involves transactions with foreign countries. The domestic trade of a nation is invaluable. It provides citizens with access to necessary, useful, or enjoyable goods, stimulates the circulation of money, boosts productivity, and invigorates labor. By supporting the livelihood of many, it plays a critical role in enhancing both the population and the strength of the state. International trade similarly proves beneficial, offering two key advantages. Firstly, it enables a nation to obtain items that cannot be sourced from local resources or manufacturing. Secondly, when managed effectively, it can significantly enhance national wealth and prosperity. Historical examples, such as Carthage in ancient times and the English and Dutch in more recent history, illustrate this point well. Carthage, through its immense wealth, was able to rival Rome's military might, while Holland amassed great riches and established
Is it a line on a map, a flag in the wind? The journey from a territory to a sovereign nation is one of the most complex processes in our world. A quest for identity, autonomy, and a seat at the global table. At the heart of this quest lies the concept of sovereign statehood, and its definition is rooted in a landmark international agreement. The 1933 Montevideo Convention provides the classic framework, outlining 4 key criteria. First, a permanent population. This isn't just about a minimum number of people, but a stable, continuous community. It's the human fabric of the nation, the people who build its culture, drive its economy, and share a collective will to live together as a distinct society. Second, a defined territory. This is the physical space the nation calls home, with borders separating it from its neighbors. While these borders can be disputed, the state must have a stable core territory over which it exercises control. This land is the stage upon which the nation's history is written, and its future unfolds. Third, a functioning government. This is the state's political apparatus, the institution that provides order, protects citizens, and manages public services. It must exercise effective control over its territory, independent of outside forces. This is the principle of internal sovereignty, the supreme authority within one's own borders, free from the control of any other state. Finally, the capacity to enter into relations with other states. This means it can make treaties, send ambassadors, and participate in international affairs as an independent equal. This external sovereignty is crucial, as it signals to the world that the nation is the master of its own destiny, not a colony or a puppet state. However, meeting these criteria is often just the beginning. The concept of recognition adds a deeply political layer. The Montevideo Convention champions the declarative theory of statehood. If you meet the criteria, you a state, whether or not others agree. But in practice, the constitutive theory often holds more sway. The idea that a state only truly exists when it is recognized by other established states. This recognition can be a powerful political tool, creating a world of de facto states that exist in limbo, possessing all the attributes of a nation but lacking a formal place in the international community. To be recognized as a sovereign state on the world stage, a political entity must meet 4 fundamental criteria established in international law. These pillars define a nation's very existence. The first is a stable population. This doesn't refer to a fixed number but to a permanent community of people residing within the state's boundaries. Whether a nation of billions or just a few thousand, what matters is the continuous and enduring presence of its inhabitants. This population forms the social fabric of the state, a diverse tapestry of individuals from all walks of life and backgrounds, bound together by the common threads of citizenship and national identity. Next, a state must have a clearly defined territory. This is the specific geographical area, encompassing land, water, and airspace, over which the state exercises control. These borders, whether formed by natural landmarks like rivers and mountains, or drawn as lines on a map, are crucial. They delineate the physical extent of a state's authority, helping to prevent disputes with neighbors and allowing the government to manage resources and enforce its laws within a recognized and undisputed space. Within this territory there must be an established government. This is the administrative and political apparatus that exercises effective control. While forms of government vary widely, from democracies to monarchies, the key requirement is a functioning authority that can create and enforce laws, maintain public order, provide essential services for its population, and manage the state's affairs. Without an effective government, a state is merely a territory with people, lacking the organization to function. Finally, and perhaps most critically, a state must possess sovereignty, the capacity to engage with other states. This means it is independent and free from external control, able to govern itself without outside interference. This independence is demonstrated through actions like entering into treaties, exchanging ambassadors, and joining international organizations such as the United Nations. It is this recognition by the global community that ultimately solidifies a nation's status as a true sovereign state on the world stage. At the heart of statehood lies the principle of sovereign control, which is inextricably linked to the right of self-determination. This fundamental concept asserts that a people have the inherent authority to freely choose their sovereignty and international political status without external compulsion or interference. A sovereign nation, therefore, wields the power to manage its own destiny. Internally, this means creating laws, establishing justice systems, managing its economy, and controlling its natural resources for the benefit of its population. Externally, it involves the capacity to forge treaties, engage in diplomacy, declare war or peace, and participate as an equal in the global community. This right was a powerful driver behind the decolonization movements of the 20th century, as nations across Africa, Asia, and the Americas fought to cast off colonial rule and chart their own course. The question, however, is not just about declaring independence, but about how that declaration is legitimized on the world stage. This brings us to a central debate in international law, framed by two competing ideas: the declarative and constitutive theories of statehood. The declarative theory, most famously codified in the 1933 Montevideo Convention, offers an objective, checklist-style approach. It posits that an entity is a state if it meets four specific criteria. First, a permanent population. The size is irrelevant, but there must be a stable community. Second, a defined territory. While border disputes are common, there must be a core area under consistent control. Third, a government. This government must exercise effective authority within its territory and be independent of other states. And fourth, the capacity to enter into relations with other states. This demonstrates true independence on the international stage. From this perspective, statehood is a matter of fact. If you meet the criteria, you are a state, regardless of whether other countries agree. In stark contrast, the constitutive theory argues that statehood is not a right, but a privilege granted by other nations. According to this view, an entity only becomes a state when it is recognized as such by the existing community of states. It treats statehood as a political act, not a factual status. This theory, however, is fraught with problems. How many recognitions are necessary? Is recognition from a major power more valuable than from a smaller one? This approach can make statehood dependent on the political whims and strategic interests of powerful countries, potentially denying legitimate states their rights simply because they are politically inconvenient. While modern international law generally favors the declarative theory, the political reality is far more complex. In practice, a state's existence is a tense interplay between these two poles. An entity like Somaliland may have a functioning government, a defined territory, and a population for decades, meeting all declarative criteria, yet its lack of widespread international recognition prevents it from fully operating as a sovereign state. This is why international recognition, even if not a strict legal requirement under the declarative view, is profoundly important. Acknowledgement from other nations is the key that unlocks meaningful participation in the international system. Without it, a state is diplomatically isolated, unable to establish embassies, join critical international organizations like the United Nations or the World Health Organization, or be a party to international treaties. Economically, non-recognition can be devastating. The state cannot easily access global financial markets, secure loans from the World Bank or IMF, or engage in formal trade agreements, crippling its development. Its currency may be worthless abroad, and its citizens become international pariahs, their passports unrecognized, severely restricting their freedom of movement for work, education, or travel. Ultimately, recognition provides a shield of legitimacy. It reinforces a state's claim to sovereignty and territorial integrity, making it less vulnerable to external aggression, as an attack would be seen as a clear violation of international law. Thus, while a state may exist in fact, it is through the act of recognition that it can truly live and thrive within the family of nations. Historical background. The notion of state sovereignty gained significant traction following the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which laid down fundamental principles of non-interference and equality among nations.